Yes, and we're alive and we're awake and we're at Double Cross Radio here in the Jefferson Republic. The Jefferson Republic is anywhere we are. Tonight we're going to have a great show. We're going to continue on with the saga of the Bundy Ranch. And so what we're going to start with here, we're going to have well, before I start with anything, first of all, how are you doing tonight, Drew?
Hey, Chuck.
And we're alive and we're awake and we're at...
We've got a little...
that's me echoing in here. Wait a minute. That was me. Sorry.
No problem. Rookie mistake.
Yeah. It's all the hoops we have to jump through today.
I'm live from my aquaponics farm.
Yeah. This is how hardcore we are. We're getting it all. We're leaving it all on the court. That's what I used to say when I coached my basketball players. I say, you don't want to leave anything out there. Have anything left. So we're giving it all. Tonight's show, we're going to start off with a special guest. He's been on the show before, Eric Dubin. And Eric, are you there on the phone yet? He hasn't called in yet?
No, Eric hasn't called in yet. I'll pass him in as soon as he calls.
Okay. Well, we're going to start off with him, and he's going to be calling in any second here. I sent him a little message that is time that we had the phones, and we're going to be talking about the comments that Senator Reid made last week about the people that participated in the standoff at Bundy Ranch. He called them domestic terrorists. And we made some comments about that last week, too. We're very much not a fan of Senator Reid. We think that he's a despicable human being, but that's not what that's about. The reality is he is in a position of power, and he does have the ability to make our lives miserable, and even his influence may extend enough that let's see here. He says he needs the phone number again. Let's see what do we got here. We've got to get a phone number for Eric.
Okay.
Let's see. That's the 718.
There you go.
That's the one.
Yeah. Or I could call him. I think.
Oh, you think you can call him from there?
Yeah, just a second. Let me take a look and see if I've got him here in my contacts from last time we had him on the show. And for our listeners, Eric was on before. Eric has a website called The News Doctors and another website called The Silver Doctors. And I've got him right here. I'm going to try to patch him into the call right now.
Okay. We'll just type him a little message and let him know that he's being called. So, this is live radio, everybody. This is how it is. So we have Eric there?
I am here, yes.
All right. So I was just giving a little preliminary about Senator Reid's comments and how the reality of the situation, no matter what we think about and how horrible he is, when something like this happens, he has enough power to make our lives miserable. He has the power to get to probably have the president's minions put us in a black bag and indefinitely detain us at an undisclosed location for an indefinite amount of time. And this is all because of NDAA, and there's a particularly onerous part of NDAA. It's I think it's provision 1021, and if I'm wrong on that, someone can correct me, but I believe that's the one. It gives the president to kind of decide if someone should be dealt with in this manner or not. There's no court. There's no even the FISA courts, which are kind of a joke because no one even knows who's on them or if anybody is there. They just say it's approved by the FISA court. We don't even know if there's anybody there. But it doesn't even go to that low standard of justice and law. It's just out there. And we're having Eric on because he is he's been very much involved. I don't think he's in the staff at all, but he's very much a supporter of Dennis Linthicum, who's running against Greg Walden in the 2nd Congressional District of Oregon. And one of the things that Dennis Linthicum seems to always bring out in every stump speech that he makes, he goes around this district, and it's quite geographical territory. I think the 2nd Congressional District is larger than several states.
It is, yeah. It's the 7th largest congressional district by landmass.
Yes, and so anyway, I'm going to let you characterize his words, and then we're going to relate this to how this is important to everybody out there. But I'm going to let you talk because I've kind of I've wrote a note to myself. Let Eric tell the story.
Well, you guys are also certainly welcome to chime in. I'm certainly no expert on NDAA. I do know enough about it to speak reasonably intelligently. So Dennis is a constitutional conservative, and he finds any encroachment to personal liberties, including freedom of speech, and all the way up to being snatched in a black bag type operation where you could be disappeared, and under the NDAA provisions, relatives or friends can't speak of anything that would have happened to you if they had knowledge, or they might even be targeted as well. And there's no provision for someone to have due process, to be judged by a trial of their peers, to have a hearing, to be able to meet your accuser and hear their grievances and be able to address them. I mean, all these very fundamental principles that, basically in substance go back as far as the Magna Carta, but they're certainly codified in the Constitution, have been basically stripped away from every single American citizen. And we haven't seen any kind of...
It's not just... It's every single person within the boundaries of the United States. It's not...
Yes, that's true, and it even extends out of the United States, too, and the territories and whatnot.
Many of the protections that are in the Constitution they refer to persons, not citizens.
Yeah, correct. And, the point being that this slippery slope has turned into something that can create a landslide at some point, and that's basically what Drew's argument was in the beginning that was introducing this, is that, right now you don't have a kind of forest fire. We just see little pockets here and there of warning signs on the horizons or puffs of smoke, as you may care to draw the analogy, but that's what we need to pay attention to, and that's why it's really important to support people like Dennis Linthicum and other constitutional conservatives or even constitutional liberals. I mean, hey, the left isn't 100% asleep. I mean, you credit where credit is due, and this might piss people off, but Merkley, to some extent, has been somewhat aware of these kind of issues and at least has taken a positive stance on the very, narrow field of civil rights and pushback on the NSA, et cetera. I don't feel great about Merkley, and I'm looking forward to him possibly being booted out, so suffice that to be said.
I feel a little bit better about Ron Wyden, but I can agree with you. Yeah, they're not totally bad. In fact, both of them voted against NDAA, both our senators.
Yeah. Anyway, the point is that people like Dennis Linthicum are making a strong stance. That's partly a reflection of a larger percentage of the American people becoming aware of these issues. It's really hard to quantify exactly what's going on in terms of public opinion and whatnot, and public opinion polls are usually BS as well by the nature of the type of questions they ask, the ordering of the questions, et cetera. But I think it's very clear when you look at, say, for example, the Ron Paul movement over the last 2 election cycles that he tried to become president, that you've seen what was maybe a couple 100,000 to maybe 1 million or something like that in the beginning grow to a movement that is well in excess of 30 million people. And that speaks to the growth of the liberty movement and what I like to call the liberty movement, where you have kind of a nexus between the Tea Party elements and constitutional conservatives and the Campaign for Liberty folks and libertarians in general. I mean, there's a whole swath of people, and including even some on the left, and I've been interacting a lot with people on the left, trying to help them wake up and realize that Obama and policies that are basically growing, and it's not just obviously a one-party affair, but all of these various police state policies need to be challenged because it's going to destroy our republic. It already has on paper, and it's a question of whether or not the feds have a desire to execute in reality when it moves forward.
Yeah, and one of the things that Dennis brings out when he's going on is several times in the past, I think 4 times in the past 3 years, 2 times in 2012. He had 2 amendments in 2012, 1 in 2013, and 1 this year. Justin Amash has proposed amendments to the NDAA, which would take some of the teeth out of I think it's the 1021 part of the section 1021 of that act.
Right.
And each time it's been voted down, although the margin's getting closer. I think the last one, I think that the final margin was 219 to 205. So they're only a 15 vote swing would have tipped the balance there. Or actually, if 7 people or 8 people would have changed their mind, it would have passed. And unfortunately, one of the no votes on that amendment was our own Greg Walden again, as he's voted against every single one of them. So I'm not holding out any hope anytime soon that he's going to change his mind, but certainly this is one way that we can change that vote for congressional district number 2 is we can get rid of Greg Walden and get Dennis Linthicum in there, and then we have yet another vote for this kind of amendment to get rid of this NDAA and kind of restore freedom of speech to people, because obviously people like Senator Harry Reid and people like that, they are such a bent that they don't take criticism very well at all. And when you stand up to their and you expose the immoral and illegal acts that they're involved in, they get kind of perturbed, and so they strike back using the power of government against you. And it's legal, but it isn't right what they're doing, and it shouldn't be legal. And we should repeal these things that aren't legal, they're unconstitutional. And I'm just trying to want to dedicate a few minutes of the opening of our program here to giving Dennis some good stuff here, or some, I don't know, some what do they call that? Some props. That's the
yeah. Well, Dennis and I are actually going to be producing a radio program addressing the issue of the Cliven Bundy situation and land policy, and basically get a lot of his perspectives that he's had in context of the dam issues and the Klamath, the KBRA, and he's wrestled with the jurisdictional issue and the representation and questions of local impacts to people on the ground in his Klamath County as a county commissioner, vis-a-vis both the feds and the state of Oregon strong-arming basically this whole plan of taking out the dams and running roughshod over water rights. And
there is so much inconsistently, even in our state law. Gary Harrington goes to jail 3 times, 30 days at a time, for refusing to destroy his pond that he has on his land that he uses to help with fire prevention. But yet they don't have any problem knocking out the dams and sending all of the water that's in the Klamath Basin down the river into California. I don't understand it. They seem to take great relish in saying we own this water, but this water over here, which they really may have a claim to, they just let it go. I don't understand how they figure that stuff out.
It's quite a bird's nest. I mean, the legal arguments and so forth that go back and forth are pretty in-depth, and part of the reason why I actually wanted to address that subject was to have him speak to it and give his perspectives on it, because basically Klamath County Commission, or Klamath County Commissioners on the board, were kind of ramrodded into this. Certainly the current commissioners and previous commissioners didn't see the same perspectives, in part because it wasn't developed along as much, so the negative aspects of the whole KBRA didn't come to light until it was further down in the process. I mean, they have something like 29 stakeholders. There's, if I remember correctly, 4 who are quasi-ranchers. I mean, they ranch as a business, but their political ideology is more aligned with what the environmentalists are trying to do. the vast majority of the so-called board that's advising the process really are stakeholders that don't have direct personal interest in the Klamath County region.
Yeah, I think next week, Drew, or maybe I'm going to be gone the next 2 weeks. And I think one of those shows Drew's going to have on Gary Lake knows quite a bit about the water issues. Is that right, Drew?
Yeah, I'll have Gary Lake on next week.
Next week, okay. So we'll be discussing these some more. So that maybe Dennis could have someone from his campaign call in or something for that show too. That would be awesome, I think.
Maybe he might be able to do it himself. I mean, I know he'll be really busy because the May 20th deadline is the primary, and he's either going to win or he's not, and he's kind of running all over the place and trying to get as much done as possible. I'll share a story with your audience that I think people really find very interesting. I've never shared this before on air or anything like that, but at this stage I feel this kind of information should be out there. I first met Greg Walden after founding Stop Land Grab, which was an organization that's currently involved with fighting back land policy issues, and was born initially in the pushback against the Siskiyou Crest National Monument proposal. And this is back in 2010 December, and then 2011 in January, Greg Walden was making a big push to act politically and be seen in public eye as doing something against the monument, because Glenn Beck had leaked that story about the Department of Interior talking about at least 60 national monument declarations, and that was earlier in 2010 and whatnot. So the story was politically very hot. The western states were really pissed off, and Walden wanted to once again put forward legislation to either reform or repeal the Antiquities Act, which was founded in, 1906, I think, if memory serves me correctly, that basically gives the power of the ability to create a national monument with a stroke of the pen by the president. And his effort to reform the Antiquities Act was something that he put forward as a major accomplishment for his constituents. A lot of people were being threatened by it. It wasn't just in Southern Oregon. There's been monument declarations being threatened for other parts of the eastern Cascade region. So anyway, the long story made short is that fast forward about a year, and Walden's in a town hall meeting in the Medford Main Library, and I asked him before an audience of about 150 people, and I think this is even recorded on one of Kevin's videos, Mr. Walden, what do you say as far as an update to what's going on with your efforts to repeal or reform the Antiquities Act? And he kind of pauses for a minute. I mean, he knew who I was, and the very first time I met him, he pulled me into a policy meeting where there's only about 10 people, and I literally sat to his left, and I had quite the introduction to the man. So for the better part of the first 6 or 12 months or so that I had known and worked with his staff, I had a very favorable opinion of him. But the first time that I started questioning where his motives and objectives were was, in fact, this library hosted conference where he, in response to my question, looked up at the ceiling, right hand to chin, kind of scratching his chin, looking and counting the spots on the ceiling, and saying out loud all the while, well, did I put forward legislation this year to repeal the Antiquities Act? I'm not really sure. And this is going on for literally 7 seconds or 10 seconds. I kid you not. It was like painful to sit there watching him because it was embarrassing. I mean, I could see that he basically had no idea had he authored any legislation or done anything. And this was, I believe, in March, if not April, of the following year. So it wasn't like, the year had just begun and he just wasn't sure what he's going to put on his agenda. And this is presumably something that he had considered important for many, many years and told as much to all of his constituents. So I think that, that pretty much speaks to a lot of different things. It says where he is mentally when it comes to the core issues that he champions, and this is definitely one of them that he put right up there at the top of his list of talking points that certainly for someone like myself who lives out in the Applegate, when he come out and talk to people and impressed flesh out here or in Southern Oregon in general, where people care a lot about opposing the national monument, he would refer to this all the time. But it also speaks to a bigger picture kind of framing of just what happens when people go into Congress. They do things for show and speak to what they wish some folks really want to hear, at least their perception of what they want to hear, and then they just kind of move along and forget about it because perhaps it's not politically easy for them to do, and they have to expend their political capital to make something happen that others would oppose and whatnot. And there's a reason why they call lawmaking in Washington, D.C. kind of like the process of making sausage. You don't want to know what's going into it. It speaks a lot to who he is and what his character is, and frankly, it was a big letdown for me. It woke me up to the fact that this guy really is just like any other politician. He says one thing out of one side of his mouth and does other stuff. I mean, I know for a fact, because I was working on actually building the coalitions, that quite a number of other sitting congressmen in other states were trying to put forward their own versions of repeal or reform Antiquity Act legislation, and Greg Walden's staff didn't work with those other staff in other representative districts to build a coalition. That's how you get laws passed. You get people in Congress who agree with your views to line up with you, and you build a coalition and you try to push it through Congress, and that didn't happen.
Yeah, and I think he has been more or less. This is he seems like he's kind of more like a meat puppet for John Boehner. He just kind of does what they tell him to do, and that your impression of him or your telling of the story kind of lines up really well with the times when I've confronted him about things and votes that he's taken. He can't find words to explain what he has to say about it, and the one time when he did have something to say, I immediately debunked what he said with stuff from I think it was the Heritage Foundation, which isn't exactly I would say they're a kind of a Rhino Republican organization to begin with, but even they knew that the steel tariffs were a horrible deal, but he was unaware of all the information that was out there on it. That's like, I don't know if he really even has time to figure this stuff out, or he has people that are briefing him on him. He kind of reminds me of one of those, have you ever seen the show Dollhouse, where they kind of program the people to be a certain person?
Right.
He can only be that person. He can't be somebody else. So if you ask him a question, it's off topic. He's just lost because he has the programming for this meeting. This is what I'm going to say. I know all the comebacks to questions. These are the most frequently asked questions. I know what to say. I'll sound like I'm up on things. But someone asks him something that maybe is a little bit off script. He just has a lot of trouble, coming up with an answer based on a core philosophy.
Right. And what was so revolting with the issue of the Antiquities Act is that supposedly was something that he had given years of thought to. Yet he can't really figure out whether or not he offers legislation for it. I mean, how many bills does he propose every year? What, 10? I don't know.
I don't even know if he writes or I don't know if he even knows what's in the bills he proposes. I think that the lobbyists just give it to him and say, "Here, this is what we want."
Yeah.
So anyway. I think that's a great beginning to our show tonight, Eric. We're gonna go on to our next guest, Vigo. You're welcome to stay on the phone, or if you need to go, that's fine too.
Did you say Vigo?
Vigo.
Vigo's your next guest?
Vigo, yeah.
Well, dang, then I'm going to hang around for a while because Vigo and I are buddies, and believe it or not, we actually used to be neighbors too.
Excellent. Yes.
I should say that I'm. Are you there, Vigo? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Hey, nice to bump
Eric,
into you.
Vigo, you're together again.
Ta-da.
I'm
going to be quiet and hang out and see what Vigo has to say.
I was just listening. I might have to turn it off. It's on another stream here. I was just listening to Eric there.
Yeah, there's a mute thing. You can mute it. Just push the pause button on the player and it'll mute it, or you can just mute the speaker and you won't hear it.
Oh, it paused itself. There's technology for you.
Yeah. So this is awesome. You guys used to be neighbors?
Yeah, believe it or not, Vigo bought a rooster from me.
Awesome.
I don't even remember what I charged you. I've been almost embarrassed to ask. I hope I didn't overcharge you.
I don't know. Did you charge or did you give it away? I'm not sure.
I don't honestly remember. I think I gave it away.
You had too
But
many.
he killed it, so I don't have any reservations.
Oh, we don't want to have PETA down on our rear end here, so careful.
Yeah. We'd met whatever it was. I don't know, like 3 or 4 years ago. A deal about a rooster, and there we were getting in touch at the beginning of this year, and because Eric had contacted me about some of this work we've been doing in Ashland, and I was like, I know this guy's name, so I searched online and found him, and looked back in my email, and turned out we'd met all those years before, so it was destined, Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brought together by a rooster. Think of all the political scoundrel applications of that.
Maybe we could start a new political party. We'll call ourselves the Roosters.
Cocky roosters.
Yeah, something like that. We're trying to wake everybody up. See, that's kind of what I had in mind there, but that might not be the best. Yeah. Might not be the best imagery. I don't know. Anyway, we tonight, just to fill you on what was going on beforehand, Vigo, we were. This is all centering around the Bundy Ranch thing. We're trying to make the events at the Bundy Ranch relevant to everybody that's listening. So we're talking to the people in the 2nd Congressional District, and we're talking to them about the comments that Senator Reid made, calling the people who are defending Cliven Bundy domestic terrorists. And there are a lot of people east of the Cascades who have similar problems with the BLM to Cliven Bundy's problems, and they have the same kind of issues they're dealing with. I'm sure that they have a lot of sympathy for what he's going through, and yet here we have someone making these claims, and it's calling us domestic terrorists. Now someone has to be wondering, well, gosh, does this mean they can come and arrest me without a warrant, detain me indefinitely in an undetermined location for an indefinite amount of time? Is that what that means? The NDAA and their own representative to Congress voted for this legislation that might be the very act that puts some of these people in jail if they go to bat for Mr. Bundy down in Nevada. Yet if they don't stand up for him, then are they going to be the next one? You don't know. So anyway, that was the first part. And the second part is that you are formerly in the meat business, the animal meat business, and as such, you produced a really extraordinarily fine quality of pork and lamb for sale, but it was quite expensive to do it under the regulations of the federal government once again, the USDA. And so, could you just kind of go through some of the steps that you would have to do to bring meat to a farmer's market? In fact, this first time I met you was at that occasion, and how much it cost you to process an animal that you had taken for slaughter. So
sure, yeah. I mean, as I mentioned to you before. I mean, I'm not in any way. I don't want in any way to excuse the impetus that causes all of that expense being the bureaucracy that's in place. But one of the it affects different people differently, and one of the problems that we face here in the Rogue Valley and I mean in the entire state of Jefferson, in fact, although there is now one facility, but they're not necessarily doing work with other people yet, and they may not. But the long and the short of it is that USDA federal regulations require all non-domestic, if that's the correct word, species for meat to go through a USDA inspected facility, and we don't have one here. So farmers in the Rogue Valley that are growing meat for, more often than not, for the local market, have to drive their animals out of the valley to have them killed and cut and wrapped at a USDA inspected facility and then have to pay or go back themselves and ship that meat back to this marketplace. So it puts a huge burden on us. Now, you can argue that it's an infrastructural problem, and if only we had a USDA inspected facility, we wouldn't have the problems that we have. But then, as we discussed previously as well, there's this interesting situation where animals that are considered I don't know, they get an exemption because they're native, so it's a non-native animal. So if you're raising buffalo or if you raise deer, penned deer, for example, those can all be killed without USDA licensure and inspection, which just always seems very ironic to me. I mean, it's just the craziness of bureaucracy that a bovine buffalo in the same field as a bovine cow, one would have to be driven to Springfield to be killed and brought back, and the other one could be dropped in the field and packaged locally, and you could still sell that meat at the same farmers market. So that in a nutshell is that they have this requirement that it has to be under their inspection, and it does put a considerable financial burden on people if they don't have those facilities available to them locally.
Yeah, I like to point out that this is particularly difficult for someone who is not a huge concern, someone who doesn't have a fleet of trucks to ferry their animals around, someone who doesn't have an actual shipping department to their company, somebody who's more of a one-man operation or a small farmer like you were. It is a horrible burden of expense because you can't amortize that expense over a large number of animals, and you don't have an operation that is kind of started up or it's already existing that's big enough to absorb all these costs and just only increasing the cost of your product by a few cents per pound. It costs you a lot per pound to comply with all this, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, there's definitely something to be said, and this speaks to what I think is at the heart of this, at the core of this. What is for small, local, arguably sustainable farming, the biggest challenge is that the game is rigged, so as to keep you out of the marketplace. The system as it exists can only be profitable at a vast economy of scale. And I mean, I went into that rather naively, and I don't regret it. I learned a lot, but learned the hard way that it wasn't going to be possible. And at the final, at the last stand, it was me deciding whether or not I was going to build sort of huge barns and increase my production sort of 10 or 20-fold. So I would be producing thousands of animals rather than just hundreds a year. And that still wouldn't have, my prices still wouldn't have been as competitive, but it would have given the operation a chance. And I just really, someone who is motivated to raise animals as naturally as possible in the most sort of gentle conditions and the most when I say natural, those most like the animals would experience in the wild, because I had a lot of strong motivations about animal welfare and how that translates into the quality of meat, and we are what we eat. So wanting to really put a really high quality product into our local marketplace, I realized that in order to become competitive, I wasn't going to necessarily be able to do that. And it's not to say that it's impossible, but given the financial situation that I was in and the infrastructural limitations that I had, I just couldn't do it. So it was easier for me to decide just to pull the plug and just take the lessons as they were. And we then moved on to having a meat shop, which was also an interesting experience. Much very similar lessons and dealing with state and federal bureaucracy and all the different rules and regulations that exist. And in both instances, I went into it knowing that was going to be the case, thinking that with hard work and determination, hard work, and good faith, I could, playing the rules, make it work. And I was proven on both occasions that wasn't actually possible. And we did put a lot of money into both operations, and we did put a hell of a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into them as well. So my conclusion is pretty firm, and that is that the system as it exists is ostensibly designed to keep the big boys in business, and not to allow that kind of small scale competition.
The whole system to me seems to be designed for the benefit of feedlots, for cattle that are raised in urine swamps, basically.
Yeah.
And
this speaks to my motivation, and it might be a long shot for some people, but I think there'll be listeners that get this as well. And this is why I realize that it's more appropriate for me to pursue my passions and interests in liberty in other ways. It makes much more economic sense than trying to do it through food related businesses. But that is that truly you are what you eat, and the majority of people in this country today, and in most of the Western world, are eating meat that is raised in quite horrific conditions. I mean, pork, for example, they're raised in these protein production units. They don't even refer to them as pigs or animals anymore. They're protein units, it's quite inhumane what happens. And the fact that there are so many animals, up to 80,000. In a unit, and the sort of environmental devastation that this wreaks on the surrounding environment. But ultimately, what does it do to the people that work there, and what are the conditions that those animals are in cages where they cannot move or turn their entire life, where they're fed plastic pellets because the food that they're given doesn't have any natural roughage or fiber in it, so they're fed plastic pellets to keep their digestive system going, which in turn is recycled and fed again and again to the same animals. Just the barbarous conditions. For me to think that doesn't have an impact on that animal, which in some way translates to, ultimately, why do we eat? We eat because we want energy. If we're going to get down to the bare bones here at a kind of a quantum level, we need energy to survive, and animals are a concentrated form of energy which we eat. How is that energy contaminated with the sense of fear and suffering? And I wanted to offer meat that was raised in as natural a manner as possible. And you can take this argument quite far, and then you have to ultimately ask yourself, well, how do we get energy in a truly healthy that is truly healthy and truly free? And I was trying to do that to the best of my ability, raising animals on pasture with the sun on their back, with dry straw under their feet, grass to eat, and living in family groups. At the end of the day, were they still in fences? Were they still being raised to be slaughtered? Yes. But in my mind, it was a step in the right direction, and that to give people that quality of meat, I believe, could make a difference in the world. But it cost us more than twice as much to raise meat that way than you can buy it in the store. And there just aren't enough people in this region that were able and willing to support that price level to allow us to build our business. Yeah,
and this Cliven Bundy was probably somewhere in a more of a medium range between the feedlot and those inhumane conditions which we were talking about, and you're kind of a startup business, which may have you were almost to his level, I guess. You'd have to maybe double your herd, maybe triple it to be at the same level that he's at. But it's still, you're a small guy, and he's a small guy.
Yep.
And a lot of small people out there that are doing this are making big inroads in the marketplace because your quality of your product is better. It's worth more money to people. Even though you didn't have enough people in the Rogue Valley to sustain this, there are people who will pay more for this money. And the big meat packing companies that rely on feedlot stuff and chickens grown in coops that never see the light of day and are so fat they can't walk, and it's just you can't believe the inhumanity we do to animals to produce meat. And all these other operations, they've got it down so they can produce it at a certain cost, but they're still not dominating the market as much as they want. So the only way they can get more market share is to put people like you out of business with regulations. And they're the ones that write the regulations that the USDA and the FDA enforce to put the small guys out of business. We want the big monoculture agricultural people out there growing their crops. We want the big feedlots and the big meat packers like Tyson Foods. We want them. And by the way, Tyson Foods is very much involved with the Clinton administration. They're an Arkansas-based company, and they were very much involved with his rise to power. I think they are globalists, elitists, and they're anytime a meat packing company gets in trouble for a salmonella scare or something else, or a E. coli or something like that, they get shut down. They declare bankruptcy. Tyson Foods is always there to pick up the pieces. It's almost like they engage in salting the food with contaminants so they can get a cheap factory from somebody when they have to declare bankruptcy. And I hate that company. Does it show? I won't touch anything that has their name on it. I think that they know that, and so they're now putting out things under other names. But this is all part of the same problem. This is what happens in Nevada, running this guy out of business. He's producing a product that people voluntarily will pay him money for, just as you were. But they're trying to put so many regulations and stipulations on his production of that product that he can no longer sell it, and people just can't afford to buy it. They're pricing his product out of the market, and that is exactly the same thing that happened to you. I think just from the many, I didn't get to talk to you that much, but my wife was always pulling on my sleeve. Come on, we have to go. But it's just in talking to you, I just had this sense that you would have been very happy to have that life on the farm, raising the animals for slaughter and bringing them to the market and selling the meat, and having it'd be a modest living, but it'd be comfortable, and you kind of like that lifestyle if you could have made money doing it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think most of us are, consciously or not, often motivated by wanting to serve in some way. I mean, it motivates me. I wanted to know that I was doing something, something that I believed in, something that I thought would make a positive impact, in the world around me, in the community I live in, and I think there is, certainly retrospectively, and I look around and I still see a number of the farmers that I knew then are kind of going from strength to strength, and have stuck it out, mostly sort of on the vegetable side and the salad side, which arguably has its own challenges that I don't know about. I mean, I saw them standing in the baking sun throughout the Southern Oregon summers, and determined immediately that I did not want to grow salad and vegetables. But I take my hat off to them, and I think that there's something very noble about, but humble at the same time. There's this sort of, it's a humble way of life, with your hands in the dirt, and it certainly isn't easy, and it certainly isn't a way to make a fortune. But you can, if you get it right, produce by the sweat of your own brow, incredibly good food for people that. And this is the thing. I mean, it really. I don't suppose I can overemphasize it enough, and I think it's an issue that might be a little bit radical for some people to contemplate, but it's just about thinking about the energy that you consume, and how ultimately you are. It's been said for millennia. You are what you eat. Let food be thy medicine. You only have to look at the amount of control that's ongoing globally with the food system. Look outside of the borders here, where we always seem to be a good decade behind what's happening elsewhere. But the bans that they have in place, in the United Kingdom now and in the European Union, on herbal products, on homeopathic products, and different supplements, there's not the availability of those there anymore. It's quite recent, because of bureaucratic fiat that has now determined that those things are unsafe. And, we're talking about herbs that have been used, since the beginning of time, ostensibly, that because of the influence of the sort of the big corporatocratic interests, are now telling the people that they can't have those. And to think that they're not going to try to do that, or they're not already trying to do that here, with the likes of Codex Alimentarius and such like, of course it's happening. And that is, I think, should be of great concern to people. We look at the Constitution that we left the new Iraq with, where they make seed saving illegal. I mean, talk about freedom and democracy. They're let's bomb the shit out of you and then tell you that you can't save seeds anymore. Where most of the farmers there are subsistence farmers who depend on saving their seed, as their Babylonian ancestors have done for 4,000 or 5,000 years. It's concerning to me, and that's what motivated me to get involved. And I would just really, I know that some people, often conservative or libertarian, for some reason have a hard job, excuse the pun, kind of digesting this. They see it as a bit too hippie or wacky or alternative, and like to mock Portlandia and anyone that really cares about where their food comes from. But I think that it's really very important. I think that you are what you eat, and I think that the quality of the energy that you put into your body really, really matters. And all I would say is that to look around and see who is trying to control and manipulate, the food supply industry, and wonder why.
I'd like to throw out just a footnote on that, too. It's important to recognize that both left and right appreciate the food democracy movement, appreciate the anti-GMO movement. It's something that can bring people together as a channel for pushback against overreach of government.
I agree. It is. I got a little bit. I got a little bit sort of down about it earlier in the year, but I'm feeling more buoyant about it. But the sense that, particularly here in this region, in the state of Jefferson, that the idea that that hippies and rednecks can rub along next to each other, and that if they're only prepared to turn but 90 degrees, they'll find that they're actually standing shoulder to shoulder. And I think that is true of your sort of old school. Of your sort of old school hippies and rednecks, but doesn't necessarily apply to some of these people that I think are happy to consider themselves progressives, if you like, and are unwilling to see that they actually have a lot in common. What I guess in my own development, I'm learning to recognize that there are people who are quite content to be subservient to the state, and that they in fact sort of beg for the state to be the sort of the final arbiter and executor on all issues in their lives, and think that it's wrong that others don't. But
you will find a lot of people who want to ban your ability to have open carry loaded in Ashland, simultaneous be interested in getting rid of GMOs in Jackson County. So there are some opportunities, again, to pardon the pun, of cross-fertilization. There
are, and then at the same time there are others, and one of them is I think a regular presenter on this radio show is of the opinion that if you're going to really be a true well, let's use the best word that I like. If you want to be a true voluntarist, or if you want to be a pure libertarian, a pure anarchist, if you really do not believe in government control, then you have to extend that, for example, to the GMO issue, which I found very surprising, rubbing up along people who I see eye to eye with probably about 80 to 90%, and then suddenly they're unwilling to recognize that GMOs present, I would say, a calculated danger to life, to all life form. Because they're unwilling to see that, because they're unwilling to accept that there is a danger, they choose just to see it as another interference of government and sort of, scared children asking nanny to regulate for them again. And I found that that's been a kind of a difficult conversation to bring to a satisfactory conclusion for each party.
Isn't it interesting how the precautionary principle is applied only in some cases and not all?
Only where you agree that there's a danger, but.
Oh, sure.
Well, Drew Lamb here. What gets me about this issue is that people want to turn to the force of government to do away with GMO when the force of the market could be as effective, if not more effective. If you don't want GMO, don't buy GMO.
Well, then that speaks to the argument about, okay, well, if only they would be labeled, because the companies that produce them and use them in their foodstuffs have fought that tooth and nail as well. And I appreciate that there's been a response in the marketplace, which I value, which is the non-GMO labeling. But that's, you know what I'm saying? I mean, that has been a beautiful response, but it's not.
Well, you look at how the customers at Whole Foods responded. They demanded labeling, and so Whole Foods pushed that onto their vendors, and then they have labeling.
The thing that it overlooks, though, Drew, my only concern is that, I mean, this is a timely issue. It's not one that we can just let drift like pollen for decades. If there is a danger, which I believe there is, it's something that needs to be curtailed more quickly than it has been. You could argue perhaps it's too late. I've heard people say the genie's out of the bottle. They might sadly be correct, but I don't know if that's quick enough. People are, unfortunately, there are huge swaths of the population that aren't as informed as we are. You know, look at a comparable, just talking about voluntarism. I mean, I find that anyone I ever talk to about, you know, the principles of non-aggression and non-coercion, people get it and they like it, but they're not introduced to that through our media, and because they are fighting to keep a roof over their head and to keep some food, no matter what it is, on the table. They don't have the time, energy, or inclination to look this information out. And I think that GMOs are the same. I mean, people are kept, you know, fighting on Maslow's first, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 hierarchy of needs. They don't have time to evolve, you know, mentally, intellectually, spiritually, philosophically, because, with no discredit to them, they are struggling, you know, to keep themselves and their families alive.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a second point on this, and actually a little bit later we're going to have Colorblind Justice on. He's going to also join this discussion because that's kind of what his part of the show is about too. But before we get to him, I may have to say this again for his benefit when he joins us in about 15-20 minutes. There's also the point where by giving power to a government, even if it's a county government, which is much smaller and we supposedly have more control over, but still it's still a government power, we're giving the people that want to promote their product, their GMO product, a way, an inroad into getting it in the ground. They can write laws and have our county commissioners rubber stamp them, which has already been happening to some extent. I think Miner Dave runs into this from time to time. He's very much follows the county's, Jackson-Josephine County government stuff. But these things are written not even by staff. They're written off-site. They're written in other states, and they're just passed around from county to county to county. Common Core is being implemented much the same way. And so once you give the government the power to do this, then all of a sudden the government has the power to tell people what they can and can't put in the ground. And now you're almost giving them that same kind of monopoly that they have in other things by regulating the small guy out of business, and only these large mega farms can take over. I'm not sure that would happen in the Rogue Valley because this is kind of a not mega farm territory here. The land isn't conducive to that kind of thing. The really good land is rather small in size, and it wouldn't necessarily turn out that way. But it still could have effects on the market share for these big companies. Just driving those guys out of business might be enough for them. And so I'm what can I say? Drew and I are both very much against GMOs. We talk about it all the time. We think it's the scariest thing that's come down the pike in agriculture in a long, long time. Probably in the lifetime of all people that are living and whatever. It's really scary, the fact that plants could grow their own pesticides and could be lethal, and that they could mutate and pass this on. They could have some kind of random cross pollination that grows a plant that actually becomes, very much a poison. And it's really a scary thing, and it's all that is possible, and we're not comfortable at all with that situation. But I think that we haven't exhausted the the ways to defeat these people. I think that class action lawsuits and trying to roll back. I mean, I believe that these GMO companies, a lot of them have been, you can't sue them anymore. The government has given them protection from lawsuits. So that's
right.
Something right there. We could, rolling back that legislation would be a huge improvement. And once they're exposed to litigation, I think they're gonna back off trying to implement and plant this stuff all over the place.
That's the thing. In conversations, I mean, actually with David, you know, having a conversation about this and saying, well, you know, I understand, you know, at core, philosophically, that petitioning for more government, for more legislation at whatever level, telling people what they can and can't do is unhealthy, and it's not what I want. And I think it's the only time I'm forced to say this. It's when I then say, but the world we want to live in, where all of our interactions are voluntary, yet where we still do have some form of a judicial process that allows us to seek redress of grievances and to see the actions can be stopped and to see the injury, you know, can be both punished and paid for. That would be great. If only that system, as it was designed, or as we can perhaps imagine we would like it to be designed, existed and worked, that would be all well and good. But it doesn't. And you know, again, this kind of corporatocratic behemoth that has now seized control at all levels of all three branches of the government, it doesn't allow us now that opportunity. And as I see GMOs as a genuine threat to life, I am left, therefore, as someone ultimately as a human being with the desire to protect my own life and those of my family. And so, ironically enough, I then find myself with only one final thing to do, and that is what we're doing here in Jackson and Josephine counties. I don't like it, but it's a rational response given the world that we live in at the moment.
We should also point out that the opposition, the Monsantos of the world, etc., understand that the cards are easily stacked on their favor just by the situation of our situation, poorly worded, of course. But, you know, even in Jackson County, if you're successfully banning GMO crops, that's not a firewall against GMO coming into the food supply in the county, and even, in fact, the county picking up GMO from pollen on the wind. There's no solution here that's perfect. That's really the bottom line. And when you try to justify or juxtapose whatever kind of political strategy inside the context of a libertarian perspective, all answers are messy. There's nothing pristine. That's just the way it is. It's unfortunate, but that's part of the situation we face.
Yeah, and you know, I think I have a co-host here that has he's been doing a practical example of a small scale, maybe it's a fairly large scale solution to the problem of how to keep food safe. Drew, let's give you a plug for your operation right now.
Okay, fine. I own Pyramid Pure Foods, and it's an indoor urban aquaponics farm in Ashland. And so I've been trying to deal with Syngenta's toxic pollen on the wind and Fukushima fallout blowing in the wind and coming down in the rain. And I'm more concerned about that, actually, than I am about GMO contamination. However, I am concerned about GMO contamination because I do take some of my crops to seed and harvest the seed to replant. As a matter of fact, I've got a Thai basil crop going right now, and that was planted from seed from last year's crop. And so you know, I do not like the GMOs. However, I do see, you know, in my research into Fukushima, that ongoing disaster and the effects on plants through phytoextraction, I do see the potential of that causing a situation where plants cannot produce seed or fruit due to plutonium contamination. And I could see a scenario where we might need to turn to GMO to correct that, and so that we could actually have crops that produce fruit and produce seed and so on and so forth. So we could be painting ourselves into a corner by banning this. I also see the possibility, well, just thinking about this like a chess game, if I controlled Monsanto or Syngenta, I figure that those are pretty evil companies, especially Monsanto is a very evil company and controls a lot of the U.S. government. But if I controlled those companies, I think if I wanted to win the GMO battle, I would push to support movements like what that is happening in Jackson County to ban GMOs, and then I would set up a farm and I'd plant an organic crop, and then I would go and drive around and blow GMO pollen on the wind, and I'd contaminate crops around me, and then see to it that my crop got contaminated too, and then I'd start, in keeping with the ordinance that we're going to be voting on here, I'd make a complaint to the county government that these farmers had GMO crops and pretty much wipe them out, and then start all over again, where small farmers can't really do that. We're all bootstrapping, and so I think we need to be careful what we wish for. I'm very cynical. I've had problems with government for most of my life when it comes to running businesses. I've been running businesses since I was a teenager, and government's always there. It's always in my face. I've realized that government is not the solution to anything, and it causes more problems than it solves. And so I hate to see us turning to government to solve this problem. I'd like to see a different solution other than creating laws that could have unintended consequences. And so that's, and also, as an anarchist, I really don't see how this is going to work out well. I look at this as a property rights issue as well, and I don't like the way that this would be enforced, and I think it's creating a scary situation where you could have government agents coming to your farm to inspect your crop, to remove your crop. I do not like giving government any more power. We need to start going the other direction and removing power from government, especially as it relates to property rights. The right to government to come onto your property. And I just think that this is taking us in the wrong direction. However, I'm absolutely against GMOs. I mean, don't get me wrong there, but we do need to consider that there could be a point where there's a beneficial use where we might need GMOs. God forbid that ever happens.
And if that's the case, there's no ordinances that can't be undone.
Of course.
I think if there was an imminent need like the one you described, which maybe it's not too far a stretch. It could always be undone. I mean, I think it's important to remember that none of these things are ever cast in stone.
I can think of a scenario where it would be horrible and that would not be undone, and that'd be that the companies like Monsanto, right? They codify the law better. They bring in a better version of the law, and they set up inspection regimes, and the farmers have to have DNA analysis done on their plants and stuff, and they have to pay for it, which really drives up their costs, and they are forced to go out of business. But Monsanto they have huge research labs and whatever. They can provide that information for nothing almost, and so they're able to come in and say, well, the people here, they're starving. We need the food. We have to alter this. Say we can only grow approved genetically homogenized, genetically modified organisms here. So then they're able to get theirs approved right away. They can go in there and now they control all the farmland in the county, and they're the only ones that can grow stuff because they're the only ones that have approved seeds. And all the other seeds have to be destroyed. We can't have them contaminating the GMO crops. And that's almost exactly what's happened in the meat industry. They've just made it impossible for anybody who does anything that raises cattle in a healthy manner, so they have meat that's safe to eat. They make it so that you're eating cattle that I mean, why would you eat animals that live in a urine swamp? They can't be healthy. They have to be sick. They have to be diseased. They have to have all sorts of problems, and we're eating that. And so once they've destroyed all the people that have the healthy meat, I think they're going to find a lot more vegetarians, or we're going to have a lot more people with cancer and different kinds of things from the hormones they inject into those cattle and things like this. It's causing all sorts of health problems in our society. The government control hasn't been able to stop these processes. It just made it just gave the companies that are doing them a legal shelter from what they're doing, because they're able to get their people involved in the regulation of the industry, and they make sure the bar is set low enough that their stuff is always protected from litigation because they're approved by the government, but they're putting out crap for us to eat.
It's useful. It's useful when you have a revolving door into the USDA, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that there are people from Tyson Foods in that organization.
Well, I mean, you want industry experts, surely. I mean, that's the.
Yeah, the revolving door issue brings up a pretty interesting way of actually refocusing activism, because Drew's points about what goes on at the county level are very valid, and they should be of concern. What I would like to suggest is something that most activists in the anti-GMO community almost never address. I mean, most focus on labeling or county bans or bans at a state level or what have you, but I believe it was Chuck who was talking about class action lawsuits, and what would be even more appropriate is a lawsuit against the United States government and the USDA and the FDA, how they go about approving various things that just do not get official testing or appropriate testing. That's really where
it's a classic example.
Yes, exactly. And, Donald Rumsfeld's story, interceding with all of that as well. I mean, you cannot get more clear of an example of crony capitalism than that. We're talking at this point of, one major food crop, staple grain, corn, being completely, GMO at this point in North America, with canola pretty close behind. Wheat hasn't been completely let out of the labs just yet, but Monsanto and other companies are chomping at the bit to do that. There's an opportunity here to have a class action lawsuit against the bogus science and regulatory revolving door that goes on, and I think that's really something that's an issue and a meme that has to get out more in the activist community, and it's part of the reason why I'm putting it out here. Because I, for the life of me, have heard hardly anyone talk about that kind of thing. And that's one of the most productive things I think that can be done to put the brakes on GMOs while not trampling all over local property rights and things of that dimension.
I totally agree. We're getting ready to bring in colorblind justice here. So, CBJ, how you doing?
Howdy. How are you?
It's good.
Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, enjoying the conversation. We've been hammering away at that. We started off with the Bundy Ranch, and we kind of segued all the way into Vigo's history with meat production here in Jackson County. Now we're on to GMO crops, which is where we wanted to go in the meantime. So we know that you have. I think your views probably line up closer to Vigo's than they do to Drew's or mine, but I think it's important to have a real good discussion about this for people so that they get to hear all different sides of it. And we welcome you to the show, and just say what's on your mind. we'll say when we disagree.
Okay, great. Yeah, there was a lag there. Sorry about that. Didn't realize I was on the air. Well, yeah, I've been listening intently, and that was a pretty quick segue there from Bundy Ranch to GMOs, and both are heated topics today. And wow, first of all, I want to say how much I appreciate Vigo's perspective. He really laid the issues out there, and I also want to acknowledge Drew's point about whole foods. I mean, where do I begin? Okay, I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of agreement here, but yeah, there may be some points where we may disagree along the way. So we have about 45 minutes, and we can just go from there, or what?
Just go ahead and say what you think are the most important things. I know that you're a supporter of the local ballot measure, so what you think are the most important reasons why people should be voting to support that. And because we want to have people on both sides of this issue talking it out. This isn't just we're not, most of the time we're pretty much, it's our way or the highway. This is something that, we are, well, we may not agree entirely with this. We're very sympathetic to the ends that you want to achieve. We're just not sure this is the way to do it.
And I appreciate, where you're coming from. And I'll have to say right up front that this is a very divisive issue. Therefore, it's a grueling personal decision that each of us must make. And I just want to say up front that I reserve the right to change my mind up until the day that I mark my ballot. Okay, so that said, both political parties have opposing camps within each political party, if you will. Okay, liberals against liberals, conservatives against conservatives. This is a vicious issue, and it's not one I really look forward to engaging in. But I think if we could just highlight the areas that we may disagree with, I think that would be a productive conversation. I've done my own research on GMOs, not the least of which is the I'll call it a mainstream documentary, Genetic Roulette. And I don't know how many folks on the line and in the audience have actually seen that. You can.
Yeah, I've watched that. That was Dr. Is it Smith?
Yeah, Jeffrey Smith.
Yeah, Jeffrey Smith. Yeah,
Yep.
That's an excellent documentary. I think it really explains what the horror show that the GMOs are. It just explains it very well.
Yep, indeed. And I just want to state up front that my objective in coming on the air tonight is not to persuade anyone's judgment on M15119, but to hopefully raise some new information for people to check their logic, their reasoning, because our judgments are based on gathered facts, and they're hopefully confirmed. If we learn something new, wow, let's not trust it, let's not believe it until we confirm it from at least 2, preferably 3 other sources, and make sure that it is indeed true for us to embrace it before we construct a unique philosophical opinion. And I will say that I am very much about justice, and I see a tremendous injustice in the funding of this battle. There are some high stakes taking place, and obviously that are commensurate with the funding that is pouring into Jackson County to overturn Measure 115. And so, a question that I ask, and I think it's a reasonable question: who benefits? What kind of return on investment will these investors actually reap by defeating Measure 15119? And Drew, I appreciate your perspective because you include Fukushima in the big picture, and I get that. I think where I would disagree with you is the consideration of beneficial use. of GMOs. And I respect, your opinion, and even though we disagree, from what I've looked at, GMOs is essentially Agenda 21, eugenics, slow, premature death. Okay. And so, that is the end game that these big corporations are playing. And so my position is not to intrude upon property rights necessarily, because both sides are saying my property rights are being violated. Okay, so to me that's a wash. You can't really argue one side or the other, because both parties' property rights are being violated in this issue. So we have to look at something.
I want you to keep going to this point, but I have to interrupt just a second for the people out there that might understand how that could be. If you have a organic crop and your crop is contaminated with GMO pollen, let's say you have organic sugar beets growing next to the Syngenta sugar beet stuff, and now your crop is destroyed, and because Syngenta is protected against litigation, you're just out of luck. So there is another property right here to be looked upon, and that's a good point. I think that's something that I hadn't really thought very much about. I've heard it before, but you have to balance that against the property right of being able to plant what you want to plant.
Yes, and both sides would want to argue that.
There is one qualitative difference, though, vis-a-vis government, and that's that if the county is to violate a property right, it's a choice by the county to investigate. It's a reaction to somebody making a complaint. Whereas the case with the property right of organic farmers, it could be, in fact, the entire population of organic farmers in the entire county for one particular crop, say sugar beets or what have you, that exists as a GMO product, polluting and by pollen on the wind the entire county. So, one's won by human volition, one's by Mother Nature. They are property rights universally, but the violation by mechanics, so to speak, happens in different ways. It's possible the county could even revoke. I am going to vote in favor of this measure, even though I don't like a lot of the property aspects of it that Drew fairly and correctly articulated. But one of the reasons why I come to that conclusion is that it's possible to reverse the decision of the county banning GMOs. It's not possible to run in this race of time against the pollen on the wind. And one is something that we need to stop right away so that we can think straight and have the luxury of time to make decisions that are well thought out.
And that speaks to the harm, which I think is something that anyone can agree on, no matter what their philosophical standing is. That if harm is being caused, there needs to be a way to stop it and to redress that grievance. And how many small organic farms around here can go 1 year, 2 years, losing their crop and losing their income? I'll guarantee that there's none that can swallow that, so they would all be out of business. I mean, the harm that can be caused by a patented technology that is windborne and uncontrollable will be more or less instantaneous, and there'll be nothing left to defend or protect.
Yeah, it's kind of like a triage of property rights.
Right, and so when the word patented is raised, that implies feed. It's not food. It's grown from the laboratory as feed. So let's call it what it is. I mean, GMOs is not food, it is feed. And, I've got a little thing up on my refrigerator that says, try organic food, or as our grandparents called it, food. Look at where we're at. 20 years after GMOs were introduced. Okay, that's a lot of pollen drift. And Drew, again, back to you. Respectfully, we're 20 years into this, and so this subject of voluntarism, like Viggo, I appreciate that consideration first, but after 20 years of putting up with this biological chemical attack, I mean, we've got injury here, and people have been patient. They've been waiting for the people to do the right thing, but obviously if we do nothing, the end game is eugenics, premature death. Let me quote something from Dr. Vandana Shiva. She said, the giant corporations who had produced chemicals for chemical industrial agriculture were talking about three instruments to consolidate the food chain. Number one was genetic engineering as a way of control. The second was patenting seed and patenting life as a way of control, determining seed to be private property, treating the saving of seed by farmers as theft. Lastly, the design of Terminator technology, and that's a good topic to discuss, to create sterile seed in order to impose even more dependence on humanity on a handful of corporations. So we've been in this model for over 20 years, guys. How quickly can we reverse the injury through a voluntary system? That's the question. And it brings up labeling. I think most people on both sides would agree, hey, let's throw labels on the food, to determine how much GMO feed is in what we're about to consume. So the question is, should the federal government mandate labeling?
Kevin, but at the same time, if you look at labeling right now, we're having lawsuits happen because there's people that are labeling things misproprietarily. They're not actually labeling it properly. They're saying it's this or that, and it's not. It's organic, but it's not organic. It's fed by GMO. And we're seeing this across the board. I mean, this whole system with the issue, Meyer Dave's here as well at my house, but this whole system with this bill, the problem actually, like I said last night, you were there, isn't actually the bill. It's the laws that are on the books. They give unwarranted seizure and investigation. That's what the county hearings officers actually have in their grasp of power because of what's on the bill. And you and I have both talked to them and to the people that have had this written, and they had it written legally. It reflects county law that sits on the books, and this is the same thing I said last night.
Yes, and what they've done is they've taken that language and crafted it specifically to the GMO issue. And I don't believe that the language of Measure 15119 is bulletproof by any measure, and that is my hesitation, okay? I admit that this is a field day for an attorney, intellectual property attorney, property rights attorney, to just have at it and follow the money, who benefits. I mean, that's really something that we really need to consider with each and every decision that we need to make in this urgent time. So, again, I question any beneficial use of GMOs when they're designed to terminate and when they're designed to accomplish an agenda that was not designed in nature from the beginning. So, personally, I don't trust the multinational corporations. I believe it's fascism, and that's really my position. I'm not against property rights because again, that's a moot issue. It affects both parties in this issue so strongly, it really can't be debated because they're both being injured. So that's where I stand.
It's theoretically
in
possible
what
to find.
In what I saw, actually, Kevin, and what I was told, and I read it, it is actually in there. The cool thing about this bill is they wrote it so that if law changes or if you would like to redact certain proponents from that because law changes, it doesn't kill the whole bill. So we could have a GMO-free Jackson County, which I understand that labeling is the right answer in a libertarian mindset or a mindset like most of us have. But the simple fact is we're never going to get anyone on a larger corporation level to label their stuff. They can't do it right now. So if we outright ban it and we find out that it is, yes, maybe we spend some money. But the simple factor is most of the counties that have adopted ordinances that are similar to this one have actually gained organic farmers that moved there to farm organically because they were put out in another area.
Great point, Colby. And, I imagine a day when Jefferson Republic can actually attract people voluntarily. They're going to want to move here, and the property rates are going to go up, and the property owners will benefit from the appreciated values due to increased demand. What's wrong with that?
That could happen.
Part of the issue with the current draft of the legislation is that it has poor wording when it comes to due process and how to actually adjudicate or address investigation in the field. You know, that kind of stuff can be improved with better language. Could be improved in the next election. I mean, it's not. I don't see this as a black and white issue.
Eric, the problem with that, the drawing of the legislation is actual sitting county law. It allows that.
Laws can be changed.
The other thing, I mean, people keep talking about this as if it's a big boogeyman, but okay, and two rights don't make a wrong, of course, but something that perhaps people aren't aware of, and perhaps they could be more concerned about too, and would perhaps make them less concerned about, a county inspector that doesn't even exist yet potentially investigating GMO seed in our county, is that on a fairly regular basis, the USDA send out a census, if you like, to anyone that has that partakes in any sort of farming activity. You know, and it's one of these terribly official and scary-looking forms, much like the population census itself. It asks all sorts of questions and information and makes it look like you absolutely have to comply with this. Which, if you if you understand your rights and the law, you realize that you don't, and you can fit it in the shredder. But they send you all sorts of threatening letters, and they try to call you up and harangue you and get you to give up all sorts of incredibly detailed and personal information. At the same time, perhaps because of the consensual and voluntary arrangement you enter into by filling this paperwork in, they can send their inspectors to your farm as well. I know there's all sorts of sort of fascist and unconstitutional ordinances on the books at the moment that theoretically give control of all agriculture, or could at least give control of all agriculture to the federal government. But even as it stands, I know farmers in Jackson County who have found people on their property with GPS kind of geolocating computers mapping out the boundaries of their farm and where the buildings are and what plants and crops were planted there. USDA inspectors, uninvited, and I mean the guy that I know, one in particular I know this happened to, gave him short shrift when he found him and ejected him from his property. But it happens. I mean that already happens. Not to say that I like it, but I would suggest that that's another problem, another concern. That whilst it doesn't diffuse the concern about a local inspector that doesn't yet exist, I just say that we're perhaps taking that fear a little bit out of perspective.
Well, I'm familiar with the survey you speak of. I once filled them out and never have since. And the points that Drew were making again are very valid, and they could theoretically at least be addressed by better legislation next year that deals with the due process issue and the fair Fourth Amendment rights of people, and then also how people get involved with becoming aware of a case where somebody's narked on and the county comes out and so forth.
But Eric, that's the problem. That's a matter of county law that stands on the books. That's how things work. And if we don't dissolve that county law, which hopefully we do in this election through who we get in county commissioner, and I pray we do, and I don't do that much, but I pray we do. If we don't get the right people in county elections this time, we're going to have this problem over and over, because the problem is the right the left, that pretty much drafted this, and it's not all left that support it, it's not all right that support it. It's a mix in between and independent, but
call them statists.
Status is a good word. I totally understand what you're saying, Colby, and I agree with you. I agree with you, but I'm not sure you're hearing what I'm saying. And all I'm saying is that yes, these structures exist, and the back is stacked against us, and we have a political fight in front of us. But in the unfortunate situation of trying to choose a non-perfect solution, which is what essentially we all agree on, because the choices we have here are not ideal any which way because there are compromises on property rights on both sides, etc. There is the possibility that we can agree that there's the approval of an experiment here where we, on a county basis, put a ban in place and then try to deal with the imperfections of the ban as it's written right now. Laws can be changed. And, yeah, it's a political fight, and, yeah, it's an uphill battle. I hear you. But, as an experiment against putting on brakes against this GMO thing, there is one fact that is true, and that's that if the genie is out of the bottle for 20-plus years and that we are in a situation where if you don't try to put against some block against it at this point, we won't have time to make the choices in the future that with the benefit of time. So I think that the experiment is arguing the experiment in that way makes it a little bit more easy for me to, pull the lever, so to speak, in support of the ban, even though it's not perfect.
I completely agree with you, but the simple fact is we've also got to fight against the law that's unjust that makes this legislation look horrible. Because the legislation wouldn't be horrible if county law wasn't horrible.
Yep.
Well, I could chime in with another story if you can spare me a few minutes.
You can go ahead. I find this conversation fascinating. That's why I'm being quiet, listening. You guys are doing awesome.
Yeah. Well, thanks for Double Cross Radio. This is really something I look forward to every week. Let me tell you about American Legislative Exchange Council. For those who have not heard of ALEC, A-L-E-C, ALEC, I'll refer to them. They are a how do I describe them? A national clearinghouse of state lobbyists. If you can imagine a consolidation of state lobbyists in one Chicago headquarters, their charter is essentially to federalize policy with sweeping changes at the state level, but essentially 50 states at a time, bypassing the 10th Amendment. Okay. Conservatives, generally, most conservatives that know about ALEC tend to trust what comes out of ALEC. They come out with conservative policy, quote unquote. And I guess it would be safe to say that this GMO legislation is considered conservative as well. And so for that reason, I recognize that I'm breaking ranks from the conservatives on this issue. But here's what I've learned about ALEC. Senator Herman Barshagger, and he covers Central Point up to the northwest through Josephine County and so on. He proposed some legislation to ALEC for whatever reason. I believe he has some pretty strong ties with the Oregon Farm Bureau. But the point is, you can go to ALEC's website, alec.org, and find model legislation where there are two under the category of biotechnology, and it breaks out into biotechnology in agriculture. And there are two model legislations that you can find dated March 15th. Okay, so they received that model legislation from Senator Herm Barshagger, with the understanding that, they would keep it on file and not adopt the legislation until after it was to pass in the state capital of Oregon. It was sourced by Oregon. ALEC held it with the condition that they would not adopt it until it passed in Oregon state capital. Great. Senate Bill 633 changed skins, before the grand bargain. You'll recall the governor convened on September 30th this grand bargain, which resulted in 5 bills being passed bipartisan agreement right before they felt rushed to get home. I'll have to say it that way. It's kind of like jury duty where you feel like, oh, okay, just say guilty and we'll be done. You can sleep in your own bed tonight. Just say guilty. There's a lot of pressure that goes on in those halls. But the point is the Republicans evidently used this GMO legislation as a bargaining chip. It's like the Republicans said, okay, you want, higher taxes in these areas. You want PERS reform that's going to make it worse for the private sector, better for the public sector. Okay. As conservatives, we'll agree to that if, and only if, you agree to this Monsanto Protection Act on the state level, vis-a-vis Senate Bill 863. And, of course, all 5 of those bills were passed. But the point is that was in early October. Now let's rewind 4 months in June of 2013 when ALEC adopted both of Senator Herm Bartsheger's model legislations, which was the same time frame when, I don't know if you heard about this, Syngenta walked out of this coexistence summit with the Southern Oregon Seed Growers Association, stating that we're not going to pin our properties on the Jackson County map because it doesn't match our business model. Now, the coincidence of that timing of those 2 odd events, to me, is too I don't know. I think that they're related to some degree, personally, but there's a dotted line there that could be connected between those 2 dots. So I just wanted to share that background. Again, follow the money and who benefits.
I think this is I don't know. I don't have all the facts behind this, and I could be wrong, but this might speak to the example I gave of corporations and out-of-state lobbyists writing legislation that gets adopted in various states. I know that's how they're implementing Agenda 21. They write the sustainable development stuff, the smart growth legislation, and they get their agenda passed, and it's basically identical measures are passed county by county throughout the country, kind of slowly taking over making uniform laws everywhere by having these counties pass the same laws over and over and over again. And this looks like this might be doing kind of the same thing with seed laws and all the GMO stuff. And they're finding different ways to do it in different states and different counties, but they're still accomplishing the same goal. They're making kind of uniform everywhere in this country. Well, it's going to be a tremendous economic loss for this country if no country in the world will take our agricultural products because they don't want to die from eating it. And it's going to be a tremendous cost to us to pay, because we now have this stupid healthcare stuff where everybody has to pay for the healthy people have to pay for all the sick people. If people keep eating all this crap food that they serve at McDonald's and all the other different fast food restaurants, it's full of GMO crap, and everybody gets sick. They have strokes and cancer and diabetes. We're going to go broke and bankrupt in no time, and probably in my lifetime if we get all these things going. So the measures that this is taking, I'm not sure this is going to solve the problem. I'm against GMOs. I'm just really afraid of giving government more power than it already has. I think if government wanted to do something, if we wanted to use government to do something constructive, I want to bring this point back again. The best thing we could do is to get the federal government to remove the litigation protection that all these GMO companies have and they operate under, because there's no way they could be sued now. They can do whatever they want, damage people. They could, could have children being born with birth defects from this stuff, and it could be proven in court. It could be proven scientifically. You couldn't sue them because it's been approved by the government. And that's what we have to remove, is that protection.
Well, I think that you're kind of, yeah, I mean, I've been sitting here listening as well and appreciating this, and it's been making me try to think how can I pull this conversation together in some way, and I think that's what you just started doing, and I mean if you look across all of the issues that we've been discussing, from Bundy and federal ownership of land and the BLM. Another one of these agencies that ostensibly exists, by fiat, that creates, like its contemporaries, the USDA, for example, a whole host of bureaucratic codes and rules that people are expected arguably, and this is where I really think that I'm getting ahead of myself, but arguably voluntarily, all of these agencies require voluntary submission and compliance. On through to the GMO issue, talking about big pharma, big agra. What we're ostensibly looking at here is this fascist relationship between big government and big business. The vaunted corporatocracy, and I would just ask if that didn't exist, would we have anything to talk about tonight? I mean, we wouldn't. Maybe I'm just stating the patently obvious, but the problem clearly is in my mind is far too much coercive, corrupt government.
I got to chime in with total agreement. That's how I see this. If the money was not flowing, deep and fast between the multinational corporations, the biochem laboratories, and Congress, Capitol Hill, I wouldn't be as passionate about this opportunity. It's a window of opportunity for grassroots to drive a stake in the ground and say, no, this far, no farther. Or do we just let things continue as they are? That's the dilemma that we face.
Look at our current state. Look at one of our current state senators, Jeff Merkley, is against GMO, but actually receives funding in his campaign and fights against people getting campaign funding for, from corporations, but he's getting funding from a sugar company that's GMO, but he's against GMO, and he's against corporate funding.
Okay, which sugar company? Syngenta?
I think Syngenta is just a seed company.
Syngenta's, actually, its sugar beets are actually creating sugar a lot nowadays, and I think it is a sugar beet company, but it's not Syngenta. I don't believe.
They don't produce the beets; they produce the seed.
Yeah, I think the sugar companies are like CNH, but CNH I think is they were cane sugar. I don't know if they've gone over to corn and sugar beets now or whatever, but I know all these big agri companies. They also lobby for in the farm bill every year. They get billions of dollars of subsidies to produce all this crappy food. It's the only way they can make because no one will pay a high enough price for the crap they shovel out in this processed food. So they have to get it completely subsidized. So we pay for it whether we want to or not.
And then we subsidize half the population to be able to buy it.
Yes, we give them food stamps for that. And it's
I actually have it now up on screen.
Okay, you got it?
Yeah, I believe. 1 second. I have to switch between screens between talking to you guys.
But what about that, though, for a system? While he's looking that up, I mean, there's a system that pays corporations to grow arguably poisonous and toxic foodstuffs that people don't necessarily want, but they're not. The same agencies of control go out of their way to stop people knowing about the potential dangers, fight to make sure that they're not labeled so that people would know that there was something going on, and then in this very bizarre and strange world we live in, supplement half the population that are put out of work. Gosh, you could extrapolate by the mere existence of these huge corporations, supplement them so that they can buy this. That's interesting.
Well, we're facing a multi-headed Hydra monster here, and I think we all agree on that. And in reflection of that, and as somebody who would put on my activist hat right now and speak to what we can do, I don't think there really is one right or wrong answer. It's just that there's limited funds and resources of people across the United States as activists to make change. That said, it's really not any reason why multiple planks in this war can be pursued. First and foremost, make somewhere, somehow, somebody like maybe Food Democracy or whomever, other groups could possibly target the United States USDA for a lawsuit on inadequate testing and approval basis, grounds for a lawsuit. we could also do something along the lines of trying to get a consumer movement where people would pledge to purchase and demand, in fact, to purchase organic foods that are by default non-GMO, just because of the way things are written in their organic law. It's not perfect, of course, but nevertheless. We have examples where General Mills, large cereal producer, is introducing Cheerios and with non-GMO ingredients because they're responding to the market demand for it. And as people of varying degrees of libertarian perspective on this call, I think that that's actually something that we should introduce into this conversation, because it is one of the things that can, in fact, involve less government activity, more marketplace-driven activity, and give people the ability to get what they want. And, that said, at the same time, when I look at what a county-basis experiment can be in Jackson County as a bulwark against GMOs, I think that's a worthy project as well, too, even with all of the flaws. Mm-hmm. So my bottom line in this discussion is that we're, again, dealing with this multi-headed hydra, and various experiments are ways in which to try to chop off one head or another, depending on what strategy one employs, is really a big picture perspective that is worthwhile considering, too, in addition to just the county ban.
Yeah, it's another one of those, it's the seven-headed dragon that Jordan Page sings about.
Yeah. We got a free market, though, on those Cheerios.
Well, there's another example of the marketplace causing change. I'm gluten intolerant, and at first when I discovered this, and I said, well, I'm not going to be able any bread, no pasta, no grain products at all. I'm thinking, well, what is there to eat? But I've seen a lot of stuff come on the market in the stores in the past 2 years. Before I have actually eat almost normal food compared to you guys. Are just all of it's gluten free now, and that it's a little more expensive still, but it's getting cheaper as time goes on, and there's getting more and more variety and more things that say gluten free on them. And there's about 100 million people who are gluten intolerant in the United States, and they're responding. There's people out there that are entrepreneurial, they're responding to that market. If we can just keep the government from being making things too expensive for people to start up and to enter into this market, we could have even lower prices and more selection and more choice when we go to the store about the quality of products we have. And if we would stop subsidizing the crap food, then it'd be as expensive as the good food, and nobody would eat it.
Yep. I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, go. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Vegan.
Well, I mean, and this there are the two sides of the same coin. On the one, it's all of the onerous bureaucracy that the small people can't that they cannot deal with in the same way as the big entities that ostensibly have created it. But on the other hand, just that fact that those big entities are being subsidized to produce crap. I mean, that therein is the problem on two fronts. There are the two horns of government intervention in the marketplace, and that is they are both one deters healthy competition, and the other one props up that which already exists. And listening to Eric speak strategically, it would be really nice to hear an answer, perhaps, or a suggestion how we best challenge those two. One is the hand that's holding down, and the other one is the one that's lifting up.
Well, I don't know if there really is an easy answer to that question, because there are limited resources, and activists, when they try to champion one project or another, be it on a state level or a national level, there's always going to be that issue of prioritization. But this movement is big enough, I suspect, to be able to support a multi-plank address of the multi-headed hydra, so to speak. So from a strategic point of view, I think that going after the United States government and the USDA in particular is something that really needs to be done. And I'm not in a position to champion that movement. I'm not a lawyer or involved with any food democracy activists that have thought about that. Part of the reason why I like suggesting it out here and in the other forums is because I think those that are best equipped to execute that kind of an agenda and political activism should take a look at it.
And I I'd say that I don't know if you're aware of the organization or at least one of the guys behind it, but I think is it Ronnie Cummings at the OCA, Organic Consumers Association. They've been very, very active. They seem to be quite a well supported, with grassroots support, and in fact they've built quite a coalition of businesses, food businesses that do things what we might consider the right way, the organic or natural way. That might be something.
Have they ever used the judicial system?
I'm not aware that they have. No, they've been very much more about protesting and about trying to use the legislative process, which they've successively lost time and again. So they might be open to hearing about another way of approaching things.
Hey, Chuck, Colorblind, I just wanted to make a comment about what you were saying about the hope for government to make things easier for the small business. I don't expect that to happen in my lifetime because the way things are going, the language of government is money. Okay, so if you want to talk about root cause, we can talk about the Federal Reserve, the counterfeiters that set the agenda. And Kissinger had a great quote. And he said, who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. And who controls the money can control the world. And this was 36 years ago. And they've been on a tear ever since. I'd like to see this downward trend flatten in the negative position before it begins to rebound. But I don't see it even flattening. We're down and down.
Colorblind pulls a really good point there. If you think about it, though, they worked in reverse of that statement.
In terms of priority?
As a priority, yes. They took the banks over first.
Right.
Then they took over the mines. Then they took over the...
I think that's because it takes longer to subvert all the other currencies. They had a lot of different strategies they had to employ. Getting the Europe to sign on to the euro, and in some cases they even voted against it, but they forced it on them anyway. And then they destroy that currency. In the United States, they got us. They even though it was never really ratified, they passed the 16th Amendment. And they did the Federal Reserve Act, which wasn't passed legally either. And they did it they didn't have a quorum, and they still open session and passed it. So they had to do those things, and they had to, because people knew what people in those days were, they could see the difference if they moved too quickly. So they had to let that generation die and slowly make changes over time before they could really roll out the full scale domination that they're doing now. And it's scary actually to me. Colorblind had a great post on his newsfeed this week about if you had a government agency that you could cut, which one would you cut first? And to me, it was like a no-brainer. The first one I'd cut was the IRS. Is if you could destroy the funding mechanism, all of this falls apart. And the money is where it is. And so that's the first thing we'd have to do is destroy the federal and Internal Revenue Service. There would be no funding for the Fed. The Fed would collapse. We'd have honest money again. The U.S. dollar would no longer be the worldwide currency. We would not possibly be able to have the same standard of living we have now, but we could expand and grow our economy now at a normal basis. And within probably a generation, we could have a superior standard of living than the one we have here now, just by getting rid of the things that are holding us back. It would be kind of painful for a while, but I think it would be the only way to really save the patient
You say it'd be painful, but arguably that would be a world where people didn't sit for 3 hours in their car in traffic, and where they didn't sit in cubicles, and where they spent more time in the garden, and they knew their neighbors, and we lived much more like those developing countries rather than a developed world. I just think it's interesting that we use that analogy of this great quality of life that we have, but I mean, how many people are really reaping the benefits of that illusion? I mean,
the only ones that are the ones at the very, very top.
Well, unfortunately,
people talk about the IRS with the rich and the poor, and what's happening is we're having all the middle classes being downshifted into the poverty levels.
Right.
And only those people at the very top. And there's a lot of people that I would say they are high-level managers. Those people are going to be the next people to be downshifted into the poor levels. Only the elitists are going to be left.
But the poverty you speak of, there's a distinction to be made as well. It is a poverty of dependency, because there's another kind of poverty that we see around the world, and that the sharecroppers and such like would have known in this country back in the day, and that's a level of poverty, a subsistence level, where you're able to scratch out a living for yourselves, but we're heading, as you described, to a poverty level where we're looking at people being fully dependent. They're incapable of supporting and sustaining their own life, which I find rather alarming as well. But
well, I think there's a vast majority of the population of the United States is at that level already. They're subsisting on money created out of thin air, and that illusion has to go away at some point in time. I mean, it can't go on forever. So.
Yeah, I mean,
that's not just people on welfare. That's like the farmers in Nebraska that are growing corn. That's the same people. I'm talking about. There's lots of people there. They may be able to grow food for themselves on that farm, but they're not going to be able to. This whole machine is going to grind to a halt when the monetary system fails, and I don't see how that could go on very much longer. It's most of the people that I think have been correct in the last decade are saying a year or two most.
Yeah, and a few in my circles actually believe that agriculture will become the new currency because it's required for our existence. And if the money system fails, we're down to...
historically, that makes a lot of sense because all money wasn't invented by government. Money was invented by the marketplace, and it was always commodity money. And so food being a commodity, being traded, will eventually there'll be a food stuff that has a kind of a more stable value that will become will trade in that food stuff, and that will become money.
Correct.
And I already do that. I trade with crops all of the time for other things that I need. It's called agorism, and it works really well, and everyone comes away happy.
See, you're already years ahead, Drew. You're positioned extremely well, and I have a lot of respect for that.
Well, thank you, Colorblind. We'll see. We're coming up to the end of the show here. Chuck's going to be heading out on vacation, so I'll be steering the ship for the first...
I'm going to be scouting out some bug-out locations for all you guys.
Report back, Chuck.
I will.
So I'll be on next week. My guest will be Gary Lake, and... then on May 8th, I'll have Fritz Springmeyer, and I'm still working on a guest for the show after that. So,
yeah, I might be available on the 15th. I'm not sure. I'll be in transit. I might get here in time to be on that show. We'll see how it happens, but I won't be prepared to say anything.
Well, keep us posted, Chuck.
I will.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and thank you for our guests tonight.